Welcome in part 2, Cannabiz Conversations Podcast with Lauren Carpenter from the Embarc. Lauren, thank you so much for joining us. I really, really appreciate it. We're going to get into talking about the state fair there in California, something you and your team, I don't want to overstate it, but it seemed like kind of head up and kind of made happen. Now, I know I'm speaking out of school there, but Lauren, why don't you get into a little bit about how did you get started with the concept of the state fair? What does it even look like from a conversation at first?
Yeah, so it was a multi-year process to get to this point, as I'm sure you can imagine. I think the California State Fair, and that happens on a property called Cal Expo in Sacramento every year. The head of Cal Expo and the California State Fair, this is a gentleman named Tom. Tom has been a very visionary leader. And so post-legalization, the governor and our legislature started to create a pathway for events to happen in California. And, I think this California State Fair as sort of obviously the leading fair in our state, but really I think as a fair that is looked at and sort of celebrated by fairs across the country and around the world because of its prestige and its history. I think Tom knew pretty early on that sort of after this pathway was created for events, that cannabis, that created a pathway for cannabis to be part of his event, which is, if you take a step back, the California State Fair is 170 years old this year. And for all 170 years, it's really been created to celebrate agriculture. At the risk of being a total nerd, 170 years ago, when it was created, it was at a time when the population in California was rapidly changing and rapidly increasing. And so there was this movement for us as Californians to figure out how we were going to feed ourselves against this sort of rapidly shifting population and landscape. And so the state fair, while we think of it today as rides and corn dogs and everything else, the state fair really started as an opportunity to bring folks within agriculture together and to have them share best practices, because we quite literally needed to figure out how to feed a rapidly shifting population. Now, fast forward 170 years, and I think the fair has become a lot more than sort of just that celebration of agriculture, but that is the lifeblood and the spirit of what the California State Fair represents. And so 5 or 6 years ago now, I think Tom and his team at the State Fair really recognized that cannabis plays a huge role in our agricultural industry in California. To be talking about and celebrating California agriculture and to not be talking about cannabis is, it's just a continuation of sort of prohibition mindset.
It's got to be one of your best exports, right? I mean, at the end of the day, import, export, it's got to be one of your best, pieces. Like here in Wisconsin, we're corn people, we're cheese people, whatever. Like that's kind of California goes hand in hand with that. That'd be like us saying, well, we're not going to count vineyards in California. Like we don't want to invite the wine folks to this event because they're in alcohol and that's not agriculture. Like, no, it's massive agriculture and it's a big part of how we all get here, right? So that's interesting. Do you know, Lauren, if all state fairs are based on that? I feel like Wisconsin, that would totally be why we have a state fair. I don't actually know, but
I have no idea. I've just become an expert, I feel like, on the California State Fair after.
Right. I'm going to go look at the state fair in Wisconsin. I'll report back. I'll let you know. Because and if anyone watches and knows the answer to this question, let me know. Because
the world needs to know.
Yeah, we'd all like to know. All right, so here we are 5 years ago. There's a vision. They're starting to lay some groundwork. Where do you get involved?
Well, there's a vision and some groundwork, but there's also opposition. So that's a tale as old as time, right? And so I think as the state fair was starting to talk about how do we appropriately and sort of sensitively acknowledge the role of cannabis as part of our agricultural sector, there were, a handful of vocal folks, sort of advocates and, from public health and spaces and others who, were really nervous about that and about that conversation. And I think really tried to challenge the opportunity to integrate cannabis. And so that's what I mean when I say it was a multi-year process. It was a multi-year process of educating the board. It was a multi-year process of really educating staff. And I think ultimately what that led to was a really great outcome, because I think as you're working to destigmatize, I do think it's important to allow everybody's voices and perspectives to be heard. I just, when you're kind of forcing something down someone's throat, I just always feel like that starts to bubble up. And so allowing kind of that process over a couple of years, that healthy debate to occur was really important in ultimately getting us to this point. And so what that point means is a couple years ago, so 3 years ago now, the California State Fair integrated education and a competition into the state fair. And so what that means is they had a designated building within the space that was the California Cannabis exhibit. And this is a sort of museum quality, large scale building, and it's air conditioned in Sacramento in the summer. Thank God for small miracles, right? So it was this large scale activation that really told the history and the legacy and the community and, good and bad around cannabis. It talked about, the failed war on drugs and its impact on farms and small farmers and on the Emerald Triangle. It integrated a lot of content around, your body and how your receptors are sort of going to recept differently than mine, right? Like it took this very 360 degree approach, I think, to cannabis education, appreciating that this was the first time a state fair was providing a platform like this. And importantly, a couple years ago, the state fair also integrated cannabis into their Golden Bear Awards. And so that's beginning 170 years ago. Beginning that first year, the state fair created an awards competition to recognize the best of the best in California's agricultural economy. And so to include cannabis, certainly I think it's all of our hope that it had been included much earlier, right? That it didn't take 160 something years to get there. But, to take that leadership position and to really say, we are going to honor and celebrate cannabis, the best of cannabis, alongside the best of, wine and cheese and olive oil and all of these other agricultural products was huge. And so I just have to sort of stop and say, even doing that was, I think, really big and really important.
And I think that a lot of people don't, again, I think it goes back to the 18-year-old nephew. I think when you see a movement at its end, not at its end, but at its in its 20s, let's call it. From if it was a kid, I'd say cannabis is. If people say it's infant, no, it's infant to me was medical. I think we've come further than that, but I don't think we've come as far as everyone thinks we have. But I also don't think we're as far away as pessimistic people want to hope that we are.
Yep.
So I don't think that. But you're right. It's education, and I can't stress that enough. Anyone who's watching the show who's you're like, oh, I want to create content in the cannabis space. Start doing educational, okay? I got a couple people I follow on LinkedIn that I absolutely love because all they talk about is the consumer position from their dispensary, right, mm-hmm. Lauren? So they're like, look, this is what, when people come in, this is what they're talking about. Here's the packaging, here's this. That's what we all need to know because consumers are not educated. Lauren, you said something in the pre-show that I still can't get out of my head. I've been trying not to say it while we were in part one, but you are attending a 170-year-old event this year. You are having a humongous activation, the biggest of all time, consumption, sales, the whole 9 yards. And you said that you were amazed at the number of people that you encountered at this fair that did not know that California had legal cannabis, that did not know that any of this was a thing. How mind-effing blowing was that to you and to the folks around you?
It was absolutely wild. And I think, the way we designed this experience was multi-pronged or multi-part. So you enter into the educational space. And that's because, to your point, everything has to begin with education, right? Then you end within that space, you end in sort of our winner's circle, which is a celebration of the award winners, which is an important part of that education. Because it's really reinforcing this idea of cannabis as agriculture and as something that should be celebrated, not denigrated, right?
Yeah, it's giving you the name, right? It's giving you the recognition of, hey, we qualify for the Golden Bears, okay? Like we're cool enough to be in the same.
We're kind
room.
of a big deal.
Yeah, and it is. And I wish that people would see that, right, and be like, holy cow. To your point, sure. Did we all wish it wouldn't have taken 167 years? Of course we did. But I've only been around for 43 of those, and I wish it would have happened 35 years ago. So I totally get that part of it. But look at what you've done, right, in this time frame. From 3 years of having a museum and just being able to educate to now being what looked like one of your like a pop-up dispensary. I mean, one of the pictures Courtney posted, I was just like, is that lady checking out? Because look, new to the cannabis space, okay? in this regard, as far as upfront. So we've been going to shows like as press, and I go to these shows and we're like, cool, we're going to get like, because in my world, conferences are a place to get swag and to get whatever, get free giveaways. So we're like, dude, seed people and weed people, this is going to be awesome. You walk into these shows and every weed plant is fake. No one's actually selling anything. People have QR codes where I can go meet them outside. I'm like, dude, what the fuck is this? Like, this doesn't make any sense. Why are we separating all these things? Why make this big difference? So within this experience, because God knows my man Dustin and his pictures, consumption's a part of this game, Lauren. How does that conversation go? Where does that fit into the puzzle of this whole thing?
Well, I think, the way we designed this experience was you had that education and that celebration of our winners as sort of a standalone experience. And from there, you could then choose, because to your point, it was mind-boggling how many people walked through these doors nervous, scared, looking over their shoulders, embarrassed, they're feeling a little bit of shame, but also some curiosity. Like we were watching people processing the stigma that has influenced their perspective for a really long time. And we were watching them process that in real time, which is just a wild experience. I think in the cannabis industry, we are fortunate to be surrounded by peers that sort of believe the same things we believe. And so we get a little bit of tunnel vision sometimes. And so being in an environment like that, where I spoke to tens of thousands of people who've never would, at least walking through our doors in the beginning, would never go into a dispensary, right? Like the idea of that is it, and it maybe it isn't always, thick with judgment necessarily. Often it's with fear or discomfort or embarrassment, or I have more questions.
No education, right? No, one thing happened to your friend, you know what I mean? That you saw the YouTube video of the guy who took too many gummies or whatever it was. And so you're like, oh my gosh, this is what it is. And I had on episode 1 of this season was Joe Hodis from Wana Brands. Mm-hmm. And he had said, John, we expected the mom and the mom, soccer mom, to give up her Chardonnay and roll into the dispensary. I'm like, your ass, pal. No way. People they're not going to do that. I'm in a bowling league, all right? I've had my whole life. And so in my bowling league is where people will come out of the woodwork. All of a sudden, one of the guys I bowl, his wife comes up to me. She says, Sean, rumor has it, you might be able to help me with something. I'm like, what did you say? She's like, you might be able to help me with something? And I'm like, help me with something? I'm like, what? Oh shit. Okay. And it's all like this. Okay, you get it, And I think that's a really common feel from people. Granted, we're in a prohibition state, but still. It's a common thread of people who just don't get it, but haven't taken the time to have to be immersed in it. So that's what makes me happy and really puts a smile on my face, is how many people wanted to find out, Lauren. How many people came to get educated on the principles?
More than 100,000 of them came to figure this out in some way. And that doesn't mean that all of them purchased and that all of them consumed. And that's okay.
That's okay.
I think that is why this was designed. You have your education and your celebration of the winners. You then go outside into our sales area. And then from there, because of a variety of sort of regulatory complexities, right, you traverse this walking path into a full consumption area. And I think, one of my charges and passions over the next handful of years will be how we continue to get those spaces, closer and closer to sort of full integration. But I think that the design of this was really important this first year. So, there were folks that we educated and we educated them about these award winners. And then we actually converted them where they were willing to go into the dispensary area and purchase that product. And maybe it was a topical, maybe it was a beverage. Sometimes it was flower, right? But they wanted to try that award-winning product because they had sort of felt that their guard came down enough and they were able to be open and receptive enough that they were willing to meander into that dispensary.
They earn the street cred, right? You're like, look, this is a trusted source. This dude is a winner. If you replace cannabis with winning cheese and wine, people would come up and swipe whatever was on that board is what's getting sold on the back end of that conversation, right? That only makes sense. And I am so jealous of the idea that I could have walked into the state fair and walked out with weed. I absolutely love it. Quick name drop. If you have a chance to connect, young woman in Chicagoland area. Her name is Maddie Scanlon. She is on the forefront of cannabis consumption lounges in the state. And her passion is just absolutely through the roof on this. I think you two would do some really, really fun and exciting things together. So if you ever get time, check her out.
Yeah, good to know. I think, Embarc has worked in events for 4 years. Obviously, starting in 2020, it's a shitty time to start a business if you're passionate about live events, right? So that was awesome. But as events started to reemerge, we've played a big role in them in the state of California. We do the on-site sales and consumption at large festivals like Outside Lands. We were at Cali Roots this year in Monterey. And I think the reason the state fair is so important is because it is different. To your point around the conversation with Joe, I worked at two, California cannabis retailers before starting Embarc, and they both were absolutely fixated on that mom. One of them called him the Chardonnay mom. The others called him the Lululemon mom. And that mom just doesn't keep your lights on, right? Maybe she and her girlfriends come in after some Chardonnay one time every 6 months and they buy, goodies. That's so fun, right? But that's not.
They're not your day to day, man. They're not the people that come into the gas station, buy the pack of smokes and the coffee every day, right? Like we're looking for the reoccurring. You're looking for the people who are brand loyal in a space where loyalty means less and less. And I'm sure you see that all the time in your cannabis space, how hard you guys have to work to maintain the customers you've already seen. It's already hard enough for you guys to go out and acquire new customers. I mean, social media doesn't make it easy. Google makes it damn near impossible. People like Weed Maps are kind of, they're a bit of an extortionist. I don't know. I don't pay them, but I look at their data and I'm unimpressed. But the point is you have very little option to go out and how to do it, how to go out and say it. What is it like for you on that side of the discussion, Lauren, as far as acquisition? Because is an event like this, do you think this will mean acquisition for future people coming to Embarc dispensaries? Is that the view they would have gotten, or do you think you've just opened it up for people to go visit dispensaries?
All of the above. And by the way, that is exactly how I want it to be. The state fair, it is bigger than Embarc. It is a movement. This is part of a movement that is bigger than any one individual. So if this means that folks from Sacramento now shop in our Sacramento Embarc store because they really enjoyed this experience, that's awesome. And to your point, like, I will forever be grateful for that because customer acquisition is challenged and challenging. But more importantly, and more than anything else, this was such a critical opportunity for destigmatization and normalization. And now we have to continue that drumbeat with these folks. A lot of people come to the California State Fair from other communities across California. It is my hope that this was eye-opening enough that they go home and they start talking about this with their friends and eventually with their local policymakers, right? Like, this becomes that opportunity for the California State Fair to have done this, which, let's be honest, they were taking a risk on us. This was a partnership that really had to be built in trust and in transparency. But for, the police chief and the head of Cal Expo to be saying, wow, we're really pleased with how this went. We've gotten so much great feedback. That's the normalizing we need to be able to go to these other communities and have a version of this conversation with them as well. And that's how we continue this steady drumbeat of normalization. I also think things like this are really important for our brand partners. So we are not vertically integrated. When we started Embarc, it was very important to me. And to be clear, this is no diss on vertical integration or on vertical operators, to each their own, but for me, one of my previous professional lives in cannabis was at MedMen. And so for me, an opportunity, a lesson learned, I will say that, is the importance of not being a mile wide and an inch deep, right? Like, there's so many sub lessons in there, but that was a really big takeaway for me. And so I wanted to focus on being a damn good retailer. And by the way, we're not totally there yet. We have a long way to go to be.
Yeah, but you've already made a huge decision, Lauren. You've already made a huge decision to say vertical integration, not for me. And you're not saying it, but because it's my show and I've been through this many times, I am going to say it. Vertical integration, folks, I have yet in my career, in any space, I don't give a shit what we're in. We're talking about cars. We're talking about tech. We're talking about, nobody is good at everything, okay? Ever. And you're definitely not good enough to make it your business. So recommendation for anyone running a business who needs ancillary help, go find the best of the best and make a deal that makes sense for both of you to use what they do and add it to you. If it's ego, guys, gals, put it aside. We're talking about fucking profit here. It's ridiculous. I see it every single day. People are like, well, we're going to offer every product right here. It's going to be easier because people just, it's, one person to go to if something breaks, we're responsible. No, that's where shit's broken. So applaud you for the lack of vertical integration, because you just said it. You want to be a damn good retailer, and your transparency about not being one yet is what probably makes you better than you even think you are, because you're that honest about it. And that's what I tell you what, you're the second dispensary owner I've had on here, and you guys are the most honest thus far with who you are and where you are in the space. Like we had Carl from Trade Roots out east, and he was like, look, dude, I got the second best, oil in town. I'm like, what? Like, whoever admits to being second best is like, I don't care. I'm second best. Like, okay, whatever. But you said it. It sounds like you want to leave this industry better than you found it. And to you, that means normalization. To you, that means having events like this everywhere. And again, I just want to point out a lesson in how to run a business here that Lauren just gave you all for free that you should probably have paid her for, which was the idea that what she just did was big for her industry and it was big for the movement. So if it helps that, she's happy to be a part of it. She's happy to do it. It doesn't have to line her pocket to have her be involved in it. And I think too many people worry about where am I going to get mine before they worry about what is actually the cause here. So Lauren, again, I've been giving you kudos all day, but that's a big one for me because I don't hear it enough. So great job.
I appreciate it. And I think, in that spirit, that's the other kind of why this was so important is so many brands got to be there and tell their stories to, as a retailer, I say this all the time. I don't want to gatekeep. Like I am successful when my brand partners are successful, and my brand partners are successful when I am retailing their products successfully. Right. And so it is an ecosystem. And so creating this platform for these brands to be directly talking to so many folks who they are not talking to at, pop-ups and dispensaries, who they're not finding anywhere else. I think that was huge. And having that direct connection.
Yeah, the shows in I don't say ours, I'll say your industry. Those shows, those are business shows, right? So people are like, oh, I went to the conference. Yeah, I show up there as a consumer and I am like, my head is like, there's no reason for consumers to be here ever. And they shouldn't be. Like, why would you even spend a day? But you're talking about something that reaches the consumer at the level of someone being able to talk to a consumer they would have never otherwise talked to give them education, to teach them about the different, genetics or the different this or how it's going to affect their bodies. Like, it's priceless, Lauren. It's priceless.
Yeah, I think it was important. It was important to see these brands, not just be able to tell their stories. They invest so heavily in what they're building. And I believe so much in what they're building that it is important that they get to tell those stories. But I think also how incredible for a consumer to create that direct connection. We had a lot of the farmers, the award-winning farmers on site at the state fair. So these curious, right? The mythical unicorn curious consumer who actually was, for like one of the first times, an actual curious potential consumer, right? They're standing there and they're talking to Joe from Emerald Spirit Botanicals about his 10% THC flower that would never, if we're being honest, right, would never speak with mass appeal. A 10% THC flower that is not going to have mass appeal in a dispensary in California's race to the bottom, how, highest THC for the lowest price. But because of that audience and because of that open-mindedness and because of that gold medals, up alongside him, and because of his passion as the farmer standing right there, he sold hundreds of units, right? Like, which is meaningful for him and his small farm, right?
Yes, it's meaningful him to get, to be able to connect and then have people take the product and be able to sample that or speak to that. And having gotten it, like when I go to my butcher, right, and he's like, look, I'm also a chef and here's how I prepare this meat. I'm like, yes, this is why I come here. Thank you. And I will do what you just said. And I did it. And it's the best version of that meal I've ever made. And so I'm like, okay, that's my guy, right? Like, I'm not going to go deal with anybody else, anywhere else, except for this guy. So I love that. I love that connection. And I know that the farmers market scene is starting to make a little bit of progress as well in your state. Every time I'm at my local one every Saturday, I'm like, this would be a lot cooler if it wasn't the girl with CBD trying to sell hemp-infused beverages. I don't want to get into that. We don't have time for it, Lauren.
I know. Different call.
It is a whole different show with all the headaches and all the things that exist in your space, Lauren. What today is something that you're clearly here you're looking forward to, but is that Lauren's big thing for the next couple of years? Is that consumption, that normalization of that, or is there a bigger project?
My big project is continuing to invest in the basics. I believe in California. I believe in the California market more than anyone. I believe in it so strongly. I'm here for the long haul. And so in order to be here for the long haul, I need to keep investing in our business, having sound fundamentals so that we, can be here, but also in these events and experiences. I think they're so critical to the brands that we partner with. I think they're so critical to adding folks to this movement. And I think they're so critical to ultimately opening more of California. My vision is no matter where you are in California, you can have access to this plant, easily and responsibly and legally. And so for me, like everything we do, whether that's opening a store in a community that has not yet had cannabis, we spend 2 or 3 years working and creating community coalitions to move forward each of the stores where we open. These are not, we're not acquiring licenses. We are pushing those communities and those local elected leaders to allow for cannabis. We're starting to do those same things with events. We're pushing events that historically have not had an ability to sell cannabis. We're pushing them to get comfortable. We're pushing the jurisdictions they operate in to get comfortable. And this is all going to come together. It's starting to come together. It's starting to feel really magical, but it's going to continue to come together and be that torch that takes hundreds of thousands of people that experience cannabis at an event. They're going to take that torch home and they're going to use that torch, maybe as a blowtorch, to get access in their community. And I think that's my hope, is that we can play a small part in that overarching charge.
Well, I can tell you this, that you've taken a wonderful approach to date. Everyone who talks about you raves about you. And from a business perspective, once again, going into places that are already a no, right? What you're likely not dealing with is a ton of competition in areas of people who already do approve or acquiring licenses, because in most businesses, people like the easiest route forward. The route you've chosen is not the easiest route forward, but for you and your company should pay dividends if you're able to switch the vote, if you're able to do that. But again, folks, realizing that if she does this once and allows herself to come in there, it allows for a bunch of other people to come in behind. That it doesn't matter. New city, new place, new opportunity. That's the fact that your growth is bigger than a store or a multiple stores or even a business, and it's just about the plan itself, I think is beyond impressive. So thank you for keeping it that way. Thank you for being someone who is willing to just say it. And the consumptions piece is incredible. When we were in Chicago at NECAM, we had talked with folks who they're weddings. Okay, Lauren, like I could not imagine having a cannabis wedding. It blows my mind. I think it's super, super awesome. So that's just the next little thing though, right? Like these little tiny,
it's all coming.
Could add up.
Yep, absolutely.
Right? Make it into a snowball. Well, Lauren, you've been so gracious with your time. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And if folks want to look you up or follow your content, Lauren, where can they go and do that?
Well, I'm a loser. I'm not on social media. So find me on LinkedIn or shoot me an email. I'm happy to connect with people anytime. I'm Lauren at goembarc.com.
Lauren, I'm on LinkedIn and it is social media. So just
okay.
Right?
I'm slightly.
I call it the business social. I'm not on any other social media. I am on LinkedIn. Yes, the show is on Instagram. We typically get shadow banned because Instagram sucks. But whatever, I don't really care. Yeah, and so you have a great team. You're doing a great thing. So thank you so much, and thank you to everyone for checking out the show, as well as thank you to Colorado Seed Inc. and my man Peter Schweda, 30 years in the business working on genetics. If you haven't checked him out at coloradoseedinc.com, you owe it to yourself to go do that because his selection is insane. And I'm telling you, just talk to the guy for 5 seconds. Ask him about a seed. It will blow your mind what he says next. He's just incredible. Thank you so much for checking him out. And we want to always remove the stigma and uplift the plant. If we were playing a drinking game today on this show or a smoking game, that got brought up a lot, we would be walking out of here sideways. So just know that it's on everybody's mind. It's just as important. Thank you all for joining us. We look forward to having you join us next time.